She saved a dying stranger in her cellar. 2 weeks later, the kingdom learned who he was. The door didn't knock, it collapsed. Nora heard it from inside, that hollow, wet thud of something heavy meeting wood and losing, and her first thought was not fear. It was irritation. The cellar door had been sticking since October, and she had been meaning to fix it. And now something, probably one of the Halbert farm's escaped goats, had gone and leaned against it in the dark like the world owed it shelter. She put down her mug, she pulled her cardigan tighter, she went to check. The cold outside was the kind that doesn't announce itself. It simply arrives and occupies everything, the air, the stones, the space inside your lungs. The village of Crestholm sat at the edge of a long, flat valley, and in winter the wind came across that valley without anything to slow it down, without trees or hills or mercy, and it arrived at every door in the village like a landlord collecting what was owed. Nora opened the cellar door with her shoulder, because it stuck, because it always stuck, and the lantern in her hand swung wide and threw orange light down the stone steps. She saw the boots first. Heavy, dark. One of them had come half off, the laces torn rather than untied. Then the legs and the rest of him, a man, face down, his cheek against the bottom step, one arm stretched forward as though he had been reaching for something when he stopped. She stood very still for 3 full seconds. The man did not move, but his back rose barely with breath, shallow and slow and present. Nora had buried her husband 6 years ago. She knew what a person looked like when they were leaving. This man was not leaving, but he was very close to the door. She did not scream. She did not run to a neighbor. The nearest neighbor was old Colin Marsh, and Colin was 74 and hard of hearing, and the kind of man who, when presented with a crisis, would offer to make tea and then forget what the crisis was. The village had no doctor. The village had Nora, and a box of supplies she had maintained out of habit since her husband got sick, and a cellar full of cold air and an unconscious stranger. She went down the steps. She crouched beside him and pressed 2 fingers to the side of his neck the way she had seen done in the hospital years ago, more times than she wanted to count. His pulse was there, thin, like a thread pulled too tight. His coat, and he had no coat, that was the thing she noticed next, the thing that turned her stomach. He had no coat. His shirt was dark at the side, the fabric stiff in a way that told her everything she needed to know before she looked. She looked anyway. The wound was not fresh. It had been bleeding long enough to slow and dry and crust at the edges. Whatever had happened to him had happened hours ago. He had walked or crawled or dragged himself here from wherever it had begun. He was not from Crestholm. She knew every face in Crestholm, even the ones she did not particularly like. She got her hands under his arms. She pulled. She was not a small woman. She had spent 40 years doing the work that rural life requires, hauling, lifting, fixing, carrying, and her body remembered all of it even when her joints complained. But he was heavy in the way that unconscious people are heavy, which is to say completely, without cooperation, like moving a piece of furniture that has decided it prefers the floor. She pulled anyway. The step caught her knee. She felt something pull in her left shoulder and said a word she rarely said and kept going. By the time she got him through the cellar door and onto the kitchen floor, she was breathing hard and her shoulder was radiating heat. She never mentioned the shoulder to anyone. Not once. Not in the days that followed, not later when people asked how she had managed alone. She just never brought it up. She got a lamp burning properly. She knelt beside him on the kitchen floor and worked methodically, the way she had learned to work when panic was not useful, which was most of the time. She cut the shirt away from the wound. She cleaned it with the saltwater solution she kept in a brown bottle in the supply box. Her hands were steady. That surprised her a little. She had expected them to shake. He stirred once while she was working. His eyes opened, dark, unfocused, somewhere else entirely, and he said a word she didn't recognize in a language she couldn't place. Then he was gone again. She wrapped the wound tightly. She covered him with the quilt from the spare room, the good one, the one with the blue squares, the one her sister had made, and she sat back on her heels and looked at him. He was somewhere in his late 30s, maybe 40. His face, even slack and pale from blood loss, had an arranged quality, as if even unconscious he was composing himself. His hands, she noticed his hands because she always noticed hands, were unmarked. No calluses along the palm, no split knuckles, no soil worked into the creases. These were not the hands of someone who had ever broken ground or laid stone or spent a winter doing what winters in places like Crestholm required. She filed that away. She did not know yet what shelf to put it on. She went to the bedroom and came back with her husband Owen's coat, the heavy wool one, charcoal gray, that she had kept hanging on the peg by the back door because taking it down had never felt like the right thing to do. She spread it over the man like a second blanket. Then she sat in the chair by the kitchen table and watched him breathe until the lamp burned low. She did not sleep. The village woke slowly the next morning, the way Crestholm always woke in winter, reluctant, unhurried, with smoke rising from chimneys in thin, pale lines, and the sound of Colin Marsh's ancient dog barking at something that had stopped being interesting an hour ago. No one came to Nora's door. No one had any reason to. She made porridge. She ate standing at the window, watching the lane. The man on her kitchen floor breathed. By mid-morning his color had shifted, still pale, but less like paper, more like someone who had simply been kept out of the sun. Nora checked the wound. It had not wept through the night. That was good. That was better than she had expected. She pulled the armchair from the sitting room into the kitchen and positioned it where she could see him and also see the door and also reach the shelf where she kept the supply box. Then she sat down with her mending and she waited, because waiting was what the situation required, and Nora had always been very good at doing what the situation required. He woke in the afternoon. Not gradually. He came awake the way frightened people do, all at once, eyes open, body tensed, the instinct to move before the mind has caught up. He made it halfway upright before the wound told him clearly and immediately that this was not a reasonable plan. He went still. He breathed through his nose. He looked at the ceiling. Then he looked at her. She had set her mending down when he started moving. She sat with her hands in her lap and looked back at him, because she had found in her life that a calm face is the most useful thing you can offer a frightened person. "You are in my kitchen," she said. "You arrived last night against my cellar door. You were hurt and cold and I brought you inside. You do not need to be afraid of me." He stared at her for a long moment. "Water," he said. His voice was rough and low. She got up and got him water and brought it without fuss. He drank carefully. She watched him register the quilt, the coat, the clean wrapping at his side. She watched him take an inventory of himself and his situation with a thoroughness that was not the behavior of a man who panicked easily. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome," she said. "My name is Nora. You don't have to tell me yours if you would rather not." He looked at her for another long moment. Something moved behind his eyes that she could not name. "Yusuf," he said. "All right, Yusuf," she said. "Can you eat?" He said he thought he could. She made soup. She learned very little about him in those first 4 days, because for most of those 4 days he was not lucid enough to tell her anything. The fever came on the second morning, a deep, internal heat that had nothing dramatic about it, no shaking or delirium, just a steady burning that pushed everything else to the side. She sat with him through the worst of it. She changed the cool cloth on his forehead every hour. She spooned broth into him when he was conscious enough to swallow. On the morning of the 5th day the fever broke, and he lay on the kitchen floor. She had moved him there from the cellar on the first night, and had not moved him again, because the kitchen was warm and closer to everything she needed. And he looked at the ceiling for a long time with the particular expression of a person who has arrived back in their body and is not entirely sure how they feel about it. She brought him tea. He sat up slowly, accepting it with both hands. 5 days, she told him. He absorbed this. You stayed. It is my house, she said. Where would I go? He almost smiled, not quite, but almost. Over the following days, he got stronger in the slow, incremental way that real recovery works, not the dramatic improvement of stories, but the grinding accumulation of small returns. He could sit up without help on the 6th day. He could stand, briefly, on the 7th. By the 8th, he had made it to the chair by the window and spent an hour there looking out at the lane with an expression she could not read. He spoke in careful, rationed sentences. He was from somewhere east. She could hear it in the shape of his vowels, the way certain consonants landed differently than she expected. He spoke her language well, better than well, with the clean precision of someone who had studied it rather than grown up inside it. He did not talk about where he had come from. He did not talk about the wound. She did not ask. This was an arrangement they arrived at without discussing it, the way two people sharing a small space will sometimes negotiate the terms of coexistence without ever sitting down to make a formal agreement. She gave him room. He gave her silence that was not unfriendly. They shared meals. She did the work of the house. He watched, and when he was able, tried to help in small ways that told her immediately that domestic labor was not something his life had included much of. On the 9th day, she handed him a bowl of lentils to sort while she worked at the stove. He sorted them with the focused, slightly furrowed attention of a person performing a task they are approaching as a puzzle to be solved rather than a habit to be repeated. He held each lentil briefly before placing it. He arranged the sorted ones with more precision than was strictly necessary. When he was done, he looked at the bowl with a quiet satisfaction that was entirely out of proportion to the task. She had her back to him. She was smiling at the wall where he couldn't see it. Well sorted, she said. I have never sorted lentils before, he said. He said it the way someone might announce a small but genuine discovery. I could tell, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Was it obvious? A little, she said. It doesn't matter, they're sorted now. She heard him set the bowl down. You are a very practical woman, Nora. I live alone, she said. Practical is how you survive it. She ladled the soup. She brought 2 bowls. She sat across from him at the kitchen table, which was a small table because it had only ever needed to seat 2. And for a moment the proportion of the thing was strange. 2 people, right-sized for this table, as though the table had always been waiting for this arrangement and she simply hadn't known it. She ate, he ate. Outside, the wind crossed the valley. He was not a man who filled silences for the sake of filling them. This she respected enormously. Owen had been the same way, comfortable with quiet, unafraid of it, able to sit in a room without manufacturing noise. It was rarer than people thought. It was actually a form of confidence. On the 10th day, he told her his first name was indeed Yusuf, delivered with the tone of a man confirming something he had already said, but also somehow clarifying it, as though name and identity were slightly more complicated than a single word could hold. She poured his tea and did not press. On the 11th day, he said, unprompted, while she was mending a tear in the curtain and he was sitting by the window with a book she had offered him from the shelf. I was traveling. I was separated from people who were meant to be with me. The situation became dangerous. She pulled the thread through. The wound. Yes. She tied off the stitch. Are the people who made it dangerous still looking for you? A pause, possibly, yes. She looked at the curtain to check the repair. Then it's good you're here and not visible from the lane. He looked at her. You are not frightened. I am careful, she said. It's different. He was quiet for a moment. You have taken a risk you did not fully know you were taking by bringing me in. She folded the curtain over her knee. Yusuf, I have been taking risks I did not fully know I was taking since I was 19 years old. She looked at him. The cold was going to kill you, that I did know. The rest I could manage later. He looked at her for a long time after that. Not the way people usually looked at her, not assessing, not politely attending, but with a kind of full attention that felt like being read. She held it without looking away, because she had nothing to hide, and she had learned a long time ago that looking away from things did not make them smaller. She went back to her mending. He went back to his book. Outside the window, 2 sparrows landed on the fence post and then left again, and the valley was quiet and enormous and white. In the evenings she made dinner and he set the table, which he did with more ceremony than she was used to, plates placed squarely, cups precisely positioned, and she found she liked it without knowing exactly why. There was something in it, an attention to the small order of things, a way of treating a simple meal as something that deserved to be arranged properly. She told him about Owen once, not much. Just that she had been married, that he had been good, that she had lost him. The shape of it without the contents. He listened without offering consolation, which was the correct response and the one she least expected. Most people, when you told them you had lost someone, offered consolation as a reflex, like a sneeze, automatic, slightly embarrassing, not entirely under control. He simply received what she said and was quiet with it. "You have been alone here 6 years," he said eventually. "Yes. And you are comfortable with that?" "I am accustomed to it," she said. "That is not always the same thing." He nodded slowly, and she had the sense that this distinction meant something to him, that he filed it on a shelf, the way she filed things. By the 12th day he was moving around the kitchen freely, still careful with his side, but no longer guarding it constantly. He had started to wake before her. She would come into the kitchen in the early morning and find him already at the table, hands wrapped around a cup, looking out at the dark lane with the settled stillness of someone who was not simply waiting but thinking. Actively, quietly, deeply thinking. On the 13th morning, she found 2 slices of bread already cut and placed on the board. She stopped, she looked at them, she poured her tea. She didn't say anything about the bread. She didn't need to. That was the morning she understood, not in a dramatic way, not with any particular feeling she could name, that whatever Yusuf was carrying, whatever he was returning to when he left, the 2 weeks in this kitchen had not been nothing, for either of them. She drank her tea. He came in from the sitting room. They sat down. She pushed the bread toward him. He took a piece. She took a piece. The sparrows were back on the fence post. The fire was steady. Outside, the valley held its cold, enormous quiet, and inside, in the kitchen that had only ever needed to seat 2 people ate breakfast without any need to explain what the morning meant. The 14th morning felt different before she could say why. She woke at 5, as she always did, and lay in the dark for a moment listening. The house was the same. The cold outside the window was the same, but something sat in the air with a different weight, and she had lived long enough to trust that feeling the way she trusted the smell of rain before clouds arrived. She got up. She put on her cardigan and her heavy socks, and she went to the kitchen. The bread was already cut. But Yusuf was not at the table. He was standing at the window, looking out at the lane with both hands at his sides. She had not seen him stand that way before, still in a different register, a different kind of ready. She followed his gaze. The lane was empty, gray-blue with early light, the frost on the fence post sharp and clean. "What are you here?" she said. He turned. "Nothing yet." He looked at her. "But they will come today, I think today." She sat down at the table. "How do you know?" "I have been counting the days," he said. "There is a method to how they search, a structure. By now they will have narrowed the area significantly." He paused. "I should have left sooner. I did not want a risk. I was not ready to travel." "You were not ready to travel," she said. "That is not the same as a mistake." He looked at her for a moment. "You are going to tell me you are not frightened again?" "I am going to tell you," she said, "to sit down and eat the bread you cut." He sat down. He ate the bread. She poured tea for both of them, and they sat at the table in the quiet kitchen. while the light outside the window shifted from gray to pale silver to the thin, reluctant gold of a winter morning. He told her then not everything, but more than before. He had been traveling as part of something he called a review, a word he used carefully, in the way that words become careful when they are doing more work than they appear to be doing. He had been accompanied by people whose specific job was his safety. In a town 3 days east, something had happened. The details he offered were sparse and chosen, and she did not push at the edges of them. The people accompanying him had been separated from him. He had moved on foot. He had moved for a long time. The wound had happened before the separation. An accident, he said, in the way people say accident when the alternative is a longer conversation, and the cold and the distance had done the rest. He had seen her cellar door light at some point and had not made it the full distance. "You nearly didn't make it at all," she said. "No," he said, "I nearly didn't." "And now," she said. "And now they are coming," he said. "The people who work for the people I was with, they will be official. They will be looking for me officially." He paused. "It may attract attention to your home. I am sorry for that." "Yusuf," she said. He looked at her. "Stop apologizing for not dying in my cellar." He was quiet, then he said, "All right." She cleared the cups. She rinsed them at the sink and dried them and put them back on the shelf where they belonged. She could feel him watching her from the table. "What will you do," he said, "when they come?" She folded the cloth over the edge of the sink. "I will answer the door," she said, "and I will tell them the truth. You are here. You are safe. And anyone who wants to speak to you will do so without disrupting my kitchen." A sound came from him that might have been a short, quiet laugh. She had not heard that before. She turned around. He was looking at the table, not at her, but there was something in his face that she had not seen there in 14 days. Not relief exactly. Something deeper than relief. Something that looked like being unexpectedly understood. She went to the sitting room to make herself presentable, because whatever was coming, she was not going to meet it in her old cardigan. She came back wearing the gray dress she wore to the village council meetings, plain, well-made, the kind of garment that said this person is not to be managed, and her good shoes and her hair arranged properly. She put the kettle on. Then she waited. She did not wait long. She heard them before she saw them. She had been right to trust the feeling that morning. There were too many engines for this lane, which was a lane that had never held more than one car comfortably and had the ruts to prove it. She heard them slowing, and then the particular silence of vehicles being properly parked by people who had been trained to do things properly. She looked at Yusuf. He had stood up from the table. He was wearing Owen's coat. He looked in this moment composed in a way that had a different quality than the compose she had seen for the last 2 weeks. This was a practiced composure, an old one, worn with a familiarity that told her it was part of how he moved through the world. She saw something else in his face too, just briefly, before it settled. The same expression she had seen on the day he woke, when he was frightened and didn't know where he was. He was not frightened of the people outside. He was frightened of going back to what they represented. She held his gaze for one moment. She did not say anything. She simply turned and walked to the front door and opened it before anyone knocked. 3 men stood at the end of her path, not in uniforms but wearing authority the way some men wear it as a kind of posture, a set of the shoulders, a pressure in the stillness. The one at the front was tall, gray at the temples, and holding a leather folder in both hands with the careful grip of someone who was used to things being important. He looked at her. He had been prepared clearly to knock. Her opening the door had shifted something in his prepared sequence. He adjusted. "Good morning," he said. "We are looking for—" "He is here," she said. The man stopped. "He has been here for 14 days," she said. "He is safe. He has been well. If you want to speak to him, you are welcome to come in, but I will ask you to wipe your boots on the mat because I have just swept the floor. and I would appreciate it if we could all manage this without a great deal of noise, because this is a quiet lane, and the neighbors have done nothing to deserve a commotion." The tall man stared at her. Behind her, she heard Yusuf come into the hallway. What happened next she would think about later, in the quiet evenings, trying to reconstruct the precise shape of it. The tall man's gaze moved from her face to the man behind her. And something passed between them, not words, not warmth exactly, but the visible release of a tension that had been maintained for 14 days across a great distance, and it collapsed all at once, silently, like a rope going slack. The tall man took a single step back. He held the leather folder against his chest with both hands. He looked at Yusuf. And then he bowed. Not a nod, not a formal inclination of the head, a genuine, complete bow. Nora had seen a great many things in her life. A man bowing at her front door was not among them. She turned and looked at Yusuf. He was looking at the tall man with an expression that was still composed and still arranged and still the expression she had been looking at for 2 weeks. And underneath it, unmistakably, a bone-deep weariness. The weariness of someone who has been many things to many people for a very long time, and has just had 2 weeks of not being required to be any of them. He stepped forward. He spoke to the tall man quietly, in the other language, for a short time. The tall man nodded. He spoke briefly in return. His tone had changed. It was quieter now, less official, and she caught in it something that sounded like relief. Yusuf turned back to her. He stood in her hallway in Owen's coat, and he looked at her the way he had looked at her on the night she had told him about taking risks she didn't know she was taking, with that full, reading attention. "I need to go with them," he said. "I know," she said. "There are things I need to explain to you," he said. "About who I am." "I imagine," she said, "there are quite a lot of things." He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said, "there are." "Then," she said, "you can explain them when you come back." Something in his face shifted. She reached out and straightened the lapel of Owen's coat, because it had gone crooked in the hallway, and then she stepped back. "Take the coat," she said. "It's cold out." He looked down at the lapel where her hand had been. "Nora," he said. "Go," she said, "before the neighbors come out and start watching." He went. She stood at the door and watched the cars reverse carefully back down the lane, and then she went inside and washed the 2 cups that were still on the table and put them back on the shelf and sat down. The kitchen was very quiet. She sat in it for a long time. It did not come from the village first. It came from outside, from a newspaper in the eastern region that had been running a small, careful story about a missing member of a prominent family, the kind of story that is written around what cannot be confirmed, that circles the shape of the thing without naming it directly. Then it was confirmed, then it was named, and then it was everywhere. His full name was not Yusuf, or rather, Yusuf was one of his names, the third in a sequence of 4, the personal name that close family used, the one he had offered her across a kitchen table on the 5th day of his recovery while she was making soup. The name the rest of the world knew him by was longer and carried weight that the word alone could not contain, because he was the 3rd son of a ruling family whose decisions shaped policy for several million people, and whose movements, when they happened outside official channels, were matters of regional consequence. He had been conducting a private review. He had been disguised, traveling without formal announcement, because that was the only way to conduct the kind of review that returned honest information. The escort had been separated from him in a situation that was described in official statements as a security incident, and described in the newspaper with more colorful language that she read once and did not need to read again. He had ended up against a cellar door in Crestham. He had been found by a woman named Nora. The story moved across the region the way stories with the right combination of elements always move, quickly, widening, gathering detail at each pass. Some of the details were accurate. Some of them were decorated. By the third day, she was reading descriptions of herself that she did not fully recognize. And by the fourth day, the lane that had never held more than one car comfortably was holding quite a lot of them. She did not open the door for most of it. She was not a person who enjoyed being looked at. Colin Marsh from next door appeared on her step on the third morning, knocked, and when she opened it said only, "Heard you've been busy," in the tone of a man who considers 14 days of covert royal rescue to be roughly equivalent to a particularly full week of gardening. "Come in," she said. "I'll make tea." He came in. She made tea. He sat at the kitchen table, the small table, the one that seated two, and looked around the kitchen with the mild, unhurried curiosity of a person who had known this room for 30 years and was now looking for what was different. "Seems like an ordinary kitchen," he said. "It is an ordinary kitchen," she said. He said. They drank their tea. The letters came first. Then the official correspondence, formal, ribboned, embossed with a seal she recognized from the newspaper photographs. She opened that one at the kitchen table with a cup of tea beside her and read it carefully, which took some time because it was written in the kind of formal language that circles its meaning the way some people circle a topic, approaching it from multiple angles before committing. The essential meaning was this: the family was grateful. They wished to express that gratitude in concrete terms. The sum they offered was printed at the bottom of the second page. She read it twice. She set it on the table. She made another cup of tea. She left the letter on the table for a week. Not because she was uncertain. She had been certain about what she would and would not accept within the first 2 readings, but because the table was where she thought, and the letter was part of what she was thinking about, and it seemed right to let the 2 of them sit together for a while. The journalists found her on the 5th day. 3 of them arrived together, which she thought showed a lack of imagination, since arriving separately would have been a more effective strategy. She opened the door and told them she had nothing to say, and that if they photographed her house, she would view it as a personal discourtesy. One of them took her photograph while she was standing in the doorway saying this. It was not, she thought, the most flattering photograph anyone had ever taken of her. It ran on the front page of 2 regional newspapers with a caption that described her as quietly formidable, which she supposed was accurate, and which she cut out and put in the drawer with Owen's things because she thought he would have found it funny. She was asked by various people, Colin, her sister Margaret who called from the city, a woman from the village council who stopped by with a very transparent excuse about a parish matter, what she was going to do with the money. She told all of them the same thing. She had not decided about the money. She would let them know. What she was thinking about was not the money. What she was thinking about was simpler and more difficult to explain, and it had to do with the chair by the window and the bread already cut in the mornings, and the particular quality of a silence shared by someone who is comfortable in it. She was thinking about the code. She had told him to take it. She had meant it. But the peg by the back door, which she had not looked at directly since Owen died, was something she now looked at directly every morning when she came into the kitchen, and the looking was different than it had been. Not worse, different. The reply she sent to the official letter was brief. She thanked them for their kindness. She declined the sum of money. She noted, in 2 sentences near the end, that the cellar door had been sticking since October, and that the bracket had come away from the frame, and she had been meaning to have it repaired. She sent it without showing it to anyone. 10 days later, 3 men arrived from the eastern region in a small truck and repaired the cellar door so well that it swung freely on its hinges for the first time in what she suspected was several years. They also, without being asked, replaced the bracket, rehung the frame, and fixed a loose step on the cellar stairs that had been catching her heel since spring. She made them tea. They drank it standing in the kitchen politely, in the slightly stiff way of people who have been told to be respectful and are doing their best. They left. The door worked perfectly. She opened and closed it 3 times just to feel the difference. When the first journalist got a comment from someone in the official circles, not from Yusuf directly, but from someone close to him, someone authorized to speak in that direction, and that comment was published, it added one detail that no one had known before: that Nora had declined the full sum, that what she had asked for was a door repair. That detail, more than anything else, was what the story became. It was a small detail. It was the kind of detail that is small in the way that certain things are small, compact, exact, containing more than its size suggests. People repeated it. It traveled further than the original story had traveled. It acquired interpretations she had not intended and meanings she had not assigned. She read some of the interpretations. She found them interesting. She was not sure any of them were entirely correct, but she was not sure they were entirely wrong either. Her sister Margaret called again. "Nora," she said, "you could have asked for anything." "I asked for what I needed," Nora said. "A door." "It was a very bad door, Margaret." Her sister made a sound that was equal parts exasperation and love. "You are impossible." "That is not the first time you have said that," Nora said. "He came in the spring." She knew it was him from the sound of a single car on the lane. Not a convoy, not the organized arrival of official people. Just one car moving at the pace of someone who was not in a hurry and was not trying to be impressive. She was in the garden when it stopped. She was on her knees in the soil working around the early bulbs, wearing her old work gloves and the coat she kept for garden use, which was not a coat she would have chosen to be seen in under different circumstances. She heard the car door close. She heard steps on the lane. She kept her hands in the soil for one more moment. Then she sat back on her heels and looked up. He was standing at the garden gate. He was wearing his own coat, this one, a good one, dark blue, the kind of coat that was simple and expensive in the way that requires not noticing either, and he looked, compared to the man who had arrived against her cellar door in November, entirely different. Recovered, present, solid in the particular way that people become solid when they have fully returned to themselves. He was also holding Owen's coat folded over one arm. She stood up. She pulled her gloves off. "You came back," she said. "I said I would," he said. She opened the gate. He came through it. They stood in her garden in the thin spring sunlight, which was doing its best and making reasonable progress. "The coat," she said. "I could not keep it," he said. "It didn't belong to me." She looked at it. She thought about the peg by the back door. "No," she said, "I suppose it didn't." He held it out. She took it. The wool was still good, heavy and clean, and faintly familiar in a way she had not expected to feel. She folded it over her own arm. "Come inside," she said. "I'll make tea." He wiped his boots on the mat. She noticed. She said nothing. In the kitchen she put the kettle on and he sat at the table, the small table, the one that seated two, and looked around the kitchen with the expression of a person who is returning to a place and checking whether it matches what they have been carrying in their memory. She watched him find that it did. "The door works," he said. "The door works beautifully," she said. "They fixed the step as well." "I know," he said. "I asked them to." She looked at him. He looked at the table. "I have a great many things to explain to you," he said. "You mentioned," she said. "I would like to do it properly," he said, "if you have time." She poured the tea. She set the cup in front of him. She sat down across the table. "Yusuf," she said. He looked up. "I have time," she said. He reached forward and picked up the cup. He held it with both hands, the way he had held every cup since the 5th morning when the fever broke, and she had always thought the gesture had something to do with warmth, the specific remembered pleasure of a warm thing held in cold hands, a muscle memory of recovery. Outside, the garden was beginning to say things in the quiet language of early spring, first color in the bulbs, first softness in the soil. A sparrow landed on the fence post and then left again, and the valley was wide and beginning to lose its winter white, and the cellar door swung freely on its repaired hinges. She thought about what a journalist had written, that she had asked for nothing, that she had asked for a door, that she was a woman who knew the difference between what was owed to her and what she actually needed. She thought that was a reasonable summary. She thought it was missing something. She thought the thing it was missing was this: a kitchen table that seated two and someone sitting across it who had learned to cut the bread, and all the morning still ahead. The tea was good. She drank it. The sparrow came back to the fence post, and this time it stayed. The full account of those 14 days was not published until nearly 3 months later, in a long piece by a writer who had spent 6 weeks requesting interviews, being declined, and then being granted a single 2-hour conversation with Nora on the condition that she approve what was written about her before it was printed. She made 2 corrections. She approved the rest. What the piece captured, and what the shorter stories before it had not quite managed, was the texture of the thing, not the event but the weight of it. The way something that is quietly enormous can sit inside an ordinary kitchen for 14 days and look, from the outside, like nothing more than a widow being careful with a stranger. The 2 corrections she requested were small. One was a factual matter. She had not, as the first draft stated, recognized anything unusual about him on the first night. She had recognized that his hands were unmarked. That was all. The conclusion she had eventually drawn from that detail had taken time, and she wanted the timeline accurate. The second correction was a sentence that described her as selfless. She crossed it out. She wrote in the margin, "I was not selfless. I did what the situation required. These are not the same thing. Please use the second version." The writer used the second version. That sentence, like the detail about the door, traveled further than the rest of the piece. It was quoted in other publications. It was attributed to her directly, which was correct, and occasionally paraphrased into something softer and more inspirational, which she found irritating when she encountered it. She did not grant further interviews. She was asked frequently, in letters and occasionally in person when the occasional journalist still found their way to the lane, whether she had known, whether, on some level, she had understood who she was harboring, whether the decision to help had been made with any awareness of the consequences. Her answer was consistent. She had not known. She had seen a man who was going to die in the cold if she did not intervene. She had intervened. What came after that was not a chain of heroic decisions. It was a chain of practical ones. You clean the wound or you don't. You bring the quilt or you don't. You open the door or you don't. She had opened the door. She thought that most people, given the same circumstances, would have done the same. She said this in the one interview, and it was the part that was most often left out when the piece was quoted, which she also found irritating, because she thought it was the most important part. In the summer, an organization in the eastern region that provided emergency medical training to people in rural areas announced a new program. It was funded, the announcement stated, through a private donation. The program was named after no one. It was simply called what it was, the Rural Emergency Response Initiative. Nora learned about it from Margaret, who called to read her the announcement and was crying slightly by the end of it. Nora was quiet for a moment. "He didn't name it after me," she said. "No," said Margaret. "Good," she said. "I would have found that embarrassing." Margaret made the sound again, equal parts exasperation and love. Nora looked out the kitchen window at the garden, which was fully itself now in late summer, green and specific, and full of things that had been put in the ground in hope and had, this year, come through. "He understood," she said, more to herself than to Margaret. "What?" said Margaret. That the point was never the person, she said. The point was the next time. All the next times. She heard her sister go quiet in the way that meant she was thinking about this carefully. You are a very unusual woman, Nora, Margaret said finally. I am a very practical woman, Nora said. I keep telling everyone. He came in the autumn too, and again the following spring. Each time he called ahead, a courtesy she had not asked for but appreciated, and each time he arrived alone, in the same dark blue coat, and wiped his boots on the mat without being reminded. By the second visit she had stopped finding it remarkable that someone with his responsibilities and his name, and the full weight of what he carried in the world could sit at a small kitchen table and be, for a few hours, simply a person drinking tea. By the third visit she had stopped noticing the not remarkableness of it, which meant she had stopped thinking about him in terms of what he was, and had simply absorbed him into the ordinary texture of her days, the way you absorb the sparrows on the fence post and the smell of the garden after rain. He always cut the bread. She had stopped mentioning it. It was simply how the morning went. On his third visit he asked about Owen. More than she had told him before, not the shape of it, but the contents. She told him. It took longer than she expected, partly because there was more to say than she had realized, and partly because he listened in the way that makes you want to say more, that particular quality of attention that creates space rather than filling it. When she was done, he was quiet for a while. He sounds like someone worth missing, he said. Yes, she said, he was. She looked at the peg by the back door where the charcoal gray coat hung again, back in its place. She had put it there when Yusuf returned it in the spring, and she had not taken it down since. She thought she would not take it down. I think, she said, that the people worth missing are the ones who change the shape of ordinary things. After they go, a table is not just a table, a coat is not just a coat. She paused. It is not a sad thing exactly. It is a full thing. Things can be full without being heavy. He looked at her for a long moment. I will think about that for a long time, he said. You don't have to tell me what you decide, she said. No, he said, but I might. She pushed the bread toward him. He took a piece. She took a piece. Outside, the lane was quiet. The cellar door was closed and true in its frame. The sparrow, or a sparrow, she could not tell if it was the same one, was on the fence post, and the valley was moving into its autumn color, amber and rust, and the particular gold of things that have grown all summer and are now, briefly, perfect. She had not changed her life for this. She had not built anything around it or rearranged anything to accommodate it. What had arrived at her cellar door in November had arrived because the world is not organized, and help is not assigned, and the distance between a person dying and a person living is sometimes exactly the length of someone deciding to open a door. She had opened the door. She thought she would keep on opening it. It was, she had decided, the only reasonable thing to do.